Center. It's for Jolson. In 2007, she was chosen as Desert Hot Springs Citizen of the Year, along with her husband, Court. Audrey is active in many Coachella Valley organizations, including the Palm Springs Writers Guild, Palm Springs Air Museum, Tools for Tomorrow, our Desert Hot Springs Historical Society, and is past president of the Palm Springs chapter of the National League of American Film Women. She has a BA in English and History from Lawrence University and a BS in Art and Design from Woodbury University. Prior to her writing career, she was a teacher, librarian, and interior designer. In 2007, she received the Citizen of the Year, as I said, along with Courtney. In 2010, she was honored for her nature writing, as already said. 2011, she received the Cabot Club of Museums Gordon Dribble Volunteer Award. In 2012, she and Courtney were honored by the Palm Springs Art Museum, Western Art Council, and received the Council's George Montgomery Award. And then just in this year, she and Courtney received the Shiny Apple Award from the Palm Springs School District. But you know what? Apart from all these things, she's an amazing, wonderful woman.
That's right.
When you look at the resume of someone's life, which this is a cool resume, what I like to look at is the impact that that person has had in the lives of those around them. And Audrey and her husband, Ford, have made an amazing impact on our town. My wife and I first met them at a fundraiser for Cabot's at their Bowling Wells Ranch in 2003 when the late Poole Hauser was the guest of honor. And little did Judy and I know how much we would be involved in the town as time progressed, and how much I would get to know and appreciate Audrey for who she is as a human being. And so it is my honor that she's part of our historical society, and it's my honor to introduce her, Audrey Schumacher-Moller, our presenter tonight, and my friend.
Well, it's pretty super when you have friends like that. I want to introduce a couple more people, and that would be my husband, Courtney, and my daughter, Holly. And then there are some other special people here, too. And I would like everyone who is not from Desert Hot Springs to raise your hand. Look at this. And you are all very special for coming to support this event, and I especially really am pleased, and thank you. How's the sound? I mean, I don't want to be talking to you with a distorted voice all night.
It's good.
It's good? Okay. All right. The title is gone.
All done.
The Secret History of Desert Hot Springs. Now, is there really a secret history of Desert Hot Springs? And the answer is a big round yes. But if it's a secret, how do we know about it? So I'm going to tell you how it all began. Here's how it all got started. We're sitting on a houseboat on Lake Powell after dinner. It's a beautiful night, stars up above. And we're all talking, okay, what is there interesting to talk about? And this was at a time when I was a volunteer at Cabot's and really involved with Cabot's. So I began to talk about Cabot Yerxa. I mean, what a fascinating man and all those stories about him. So I talked for a while and then finally stopped. And someone said, well, do you know any more stories? So I thought about it for a while, and at that time I knew a bit about the B-Bar H Ranch, the Dude Ranch that was here in Desert Hot Springs. And so I knew that there were a lot of celebrities who had gone there and even lived there at times. So I told what little I knew about that. And again, when I finished, someone said, well, is that it? Do you know any more? So it took a couple of weeks after I was home, maybe even a month, and suddenly the light bulb went off above my head. These stories need to be written down, and if they're not written down, they're going to be lost. They will be lost forever. And I will say right now, before I forget, that two of the people who were sources for me for celebrities in this area have already passed away in the last 2 years. So, I mean, it's really important that we get this history down. So, that's how it all began. And then when I realized that, I began talking with the longtime residents of Desert Hot Springs, and literally the stories of celebrities exploded like popcorn in a microwave. I met with people who had lived in the area, DHS, for a number of years. For example, John Furby, who was the druggist for many years, Jim Haydett from Haydett's Hardware. He's still up at Haydett's Hardware on Pearson. Julia Santucci from the Capri Restaurant, and Paul Gregory, our grand Paul Gregory, famous producer, actor, and husband of Janet Gaynor. Paul gave me so much information that much of it is still in my notes. I haven't been able to record it or use it yet. So amazing personal stories surfaced. And that was the birth of Celebrities in Hiding. And that's how the secret history of Desert Hot Springs came into being. So tonight I'm going to tell you about a few of the really big name celebrities and a bit about their lives and how they fit into the history of Desert Hot Springs. Now we see news of celebrities in Palm Springs and the rest of the valley on an almost daily basis, but seldom are there reported sightings of celebrities north of the freeway or here in Desert Hot Springs. And why is that? My conclusion is that they are not expected to be here. And why are they not expected to be here? Because from its earliest days, Desert Hot Springs and this area north of the freeway was considered a hideaway. And perhaps it was the exclusivity of Two Bunch Palms that solidified that hideaway mystery. So surely guarding the identity of their guests adds a bit of mystery to celebrities. No, shortly after Court and I moved here, I once asked the Two Bunch Palm manager who their celebrity guest was at the time, because I'd seen a limo driving up their street. And he said, "Oh, our celebrity guests don't come in limos. They come in the commonest cars possible because they don't want attention. It's the nobodies who come in limos." And there you have it. Our celebrities did not come here to be seen. Over the years, they came generally for three specific reasons. They came to hide out, to help out, or maybe just to hang out. And this seems true, again, from the very earliest days. Think 1930. Janet Gaynor, silent movie star, and the first woman to win an Academy Award. And did she have to work for it? 3 movies in 1 year. The first movie was Seventh Heaven in 1927 with Charlie Farrell, Farrell Drive, Palm Springs. The next movie was Sunrise in 1927 with George O'Brien. And the next one was Street Angel, 1928, with Henry Armetta. And that's Janet. Oops. Oh, there we go. That's Janet in the drum. So, even though there's 2 years, the movies were still all in 1 year. So that's how she got her Academy Award, the first woman. Now, Janet had a desert cabin north of the freeway in the Desert Hot Springs area. It wasn't known as the Desert Hot Springs area. However, it was known as Seven Palms Valley. And she and her first husband used it as a getaway until a would-be abductor threatened her. He followed her across the country, sending her letters as he got closer and closer. Ultimately, she notified the sheriffs, and the sheriff's posse was ready for him when he arrived at the cabin, and they shot him dead in Janet's kitchen. That was so traumatic that she closed the cabin and stayed away for a number of years. And it wasn't until she met and married Paul Gregory that she did return, at which time Singing Tree Ranch was born and became a destination for a myriad stars and celebrities from all over the world. So let's look at the next picture. Here is a young Paul Gregory. Now, those of you who have been at the two soup suppers where Paul Gregory was our speaker, I think will really enjoy seeing him as a very young man. The caption, which I was thinking I could read, but I can't, does tell us that he was a baritone. He had appeared in operettas with Eva Le Gallienne, Cornelia Otis Skinner, and Paul Muni. Those names mean anything to anybody in the... All right, and he also was in a number of movies. So there we have the young Paul Gregory. Now let's go to the next one, which is much later, after he actually had retired. And here is Paul, and here are Paul and Janet at Singing Tree Ranch. And don't they look like people you'd like to spend time with? Now one day Janet got a phone call from someone she didn't know very well. It was Marilyn Monroe. And Marilyn said, "I hear you live where there aren't very many people. Could I come out and stay for a day or two, maybe 3, if I can arrange it?" Well, Marilyn stayed for a week. And she stayed in the guest house, and she kept to herself and had her meals sent in. So she really didn't work with the other guests at all. But Marilyn was a celebrity who came not just to visit, but she came to hide out. And let's look at Marilyn at the beginning of her career. Here she is, posing for a publicity photo for the potato industry, and she is Miss Potato Blossom. And she's wearing a gunny sack dress, and of course has her gunny sack of potatoes. Now the sad thing is, in this same publicity series, she also posed as Miss Flamethrower, and I could not find a picture of Miss Flamethrower. But wouldn't you really like to know what she was wearing for Miss Flamethrower? Now the next picture is a more typical Marilyn in 1952, cavorting in the waves at the beach. And then the next picture is Marilyn in 1960, and she is now performing in the movie The Misfits with Clark Gable. And this was the last movie for Marilyn, and it was the last movie for Clark Gable. And Marilyn died 2 years later, in 1962, at age 36. Now, few people know of Marilyn's week in Desert Hot Springs. And most likely she was here trying to find herself, because she said being alone was renewal for her. She was very smart. She had an IQ of 162. Now, compare that to John F. Kennedy, 147, and that's smart. So it tells you a lot about Marilyn. She had a very hard life, raised in orphanages, and she wasn't even ever paid as much as other female stars. But big name, big star Marilyn Monroe spent her week in Desert Hot Springs. And of course it was the hideout aspect of Singing Tree Ranch that attracted her. Now the next picture is a young Cary Grant. And he was another frequent guest at Singing Tree Ranch. This is in 1932, at the beginning of Cary Grant's career. The next picture is Cary Grant and Joan Fontaine in Suspicion, 1941, and that's about the time that he was staying at Singing Tree Ranch and visiting Cabot's museum, and Cabot actually kicked him out. It was a basic misunderstanding, and the thing that we don't know is whether Cabot actually knew who he was or didn't know who he was, but it was a misunderstanding, and Cabot asked him to leave and said, "You've been here long enough, it's time that you go now." And the next one is the iconic Cary Grant. And I love this because he has the 5 o'clock shadow, which is so popular today, and the carnation and the buttonhole, 1943. And of course, Cary Grant was one of those who more or less came, I would say, to hang out. Now, Two Bunch Spa and Resort has always been a hideaway, and it carries on today as a hideout place for celebrities and anyone who wants to rest and relax. And so while the resort doesn't divulge the names of its guests, some of the names are known for other reasons. For example, Mel Gibson prefers a certain guest house there. Barbra Streisand shows up periodically. The Rolling Stones took over the entire resort in the 1980s. Ozzy Osbourne, Tommy Lee, and Nikki Sixx of Motley Crue were there in 1985. And Robert Altman was a frequent guest, and he filmed a scene from his movie The Player there. And some of you remember the mud bath scene. That was filmed at Two Bunch Palms. So, now I'd like to go to a help-out person. And look who we have here. I don't have. This is, all at once, Clark Gable. And he's at the groundbreaking of the dedication of the hospital at Angel View. And this is his wife, Kay Spreckles, who came with him. And then these are two ladies from the town who were there. And this poor little guy, almost out of the picture, is the patient, Nicky Williams. Now, the interesting thing is Clark Gable didn't just come. He came in a helicopter. And in the helicopter also were the ice skaters, Sonia Henney, and Ray Ryan, who at that time was, big man about town in Palm Springs, gambler. I think he owned the Mirador Hotel, and big time person. So let's take a look at Gable when he was first starting out. He's trying to get parts, and look at this. Speaking of parts, what kind of hairdo is that? And look at his teeth. I mean, could you ever imagine this young man becoming king of Hollywood?
He said his ears were too big.
Yes, there they are, big ears. Anyway, the next picture shows us, he looks a bit better in this one. Here he is with Jean Harlow in Red Dust in 1932. That first picture, by the way, was 1925. So this is 7 years later. They've cleaned him up a lot. And the next picture, this is Gable with Louis B. Mayer signing him over to David O. Selnick for Gone with the Wind. And it's another 7 years after that last picture. Now, as you probably remember, back in those days, stars were on contract with a studio and they could not work for anyone else. So he had to be signed over to the different studio in order to play the role of Rhett Butler. The role of Rhett Butler had been offered to every other male lead star they could think of, and they all turned it down. And the last male lead they had offered it to was Gary Cooper. I can't somehow or other imagine Gary Cooper as Rhett Butler, but nevertheless, Gary Cooper had been offered the role, and he turned it down, saying, "Gone with the Wind is going to be the biggest flop in Hollywood." And then he added, "And I'm glad it's going to be on Gable's back and not mine." Of course, it made Clark Gable king of Hollywood. So we'll go to the next picture, which I call an iconic picture of Gable and Vivien Leigh in Gone with the Wind, 1939. And just to ruin the picture for everybody, Vivien Leigh's comment about Gable was that he had bad breath. Now, okay, it is said that Gable smoked 3 packs of cigarettes, 2 pipes of tobacco, and several cigars per day. And of course, with false teeth, I mean, there's no way one could have minty, sparkly breath. And then I'll finish with Gable with the next picture. Here are the Gables feeding their chickens. And I just tossed this in because I thought it was kind of fun. It seems as if at a certain time everybody had chickens, and I couldn't figure out why everybody has these chickens. And finally it dawned on me, these were the war years when you couldn't get eggs. And so having chickens was really important, and it gave you protein from the eggs. So even the Gables had chickens. So I'm going to go to another help-out person, and I don't need to tell you who that is, but I will tell you it was taken in Toronto in 1994. And Frank Sinatra was a help-out person. He gave $14,000. At the time, that was a lot of money for the Boys and Girls Club pool. And they wanted to name it after him, and of course he wouldn't agree to that because it's not the kind of person he is. He didn't want that publicity. But I got a nice story about him from his personal attorney, and I call it the white envelope story, because periodically Frank Sinatra would put together a stack of white envelopes with names and addresses on the top. And then he would ask his valet to bring them up to Desert Hot Springs. And his valet would have to borrow someone's car because he couldn't come in one of Frank's because the license plates, of course, would give it away. And so the valet would bring the white envelopes up here and stick them under people's doors at the right address or in the mailbox or whatever it may be, and make sure they were delivered anonymously. What was in the white envelopes? Seems that whenever Frank Sinatra heard about a kind of a hard luck story from somebody, he would try to find out who it was and where they lived, and he'd put money in the envelope for them, and then he would have the envelopes delivered. And it would be, for example, money for a kid whose bike had been stolen or ruined. It would be money for someone to pay their rent or their house payment, or maybe a doctor's bill. And he just wanted it all to be anonymous and not have anybody know about it. I see John nodding, so this is something you knew about. Yes. All right. Anyway, and I know this story is true, as I say, because I got it from his personal attorney, who is no longer with us. Another person helping out, the Eisenhowers. Now here they are at Angel View with one of the Angel View patients. And it was Mamie Eisenhower who I think has the cutest story, because she agreed to come to a luncheon that Ray Horton was going to put on to raise money for Angel View. And of course the ladies of the town got together and they made paper flowers to go on the tables, and they just did everything they possibly could to make this luncheon really nice for Mamie Eisenhower. And she did. She came, and it was a great success, and everyone was thrilled. And I thought you'd all find it interesting to note that the horrendous charge for this luncheon was $5 a person. But you see, I think in those days that probably was a meaningful amount. So, while it sounds funny now, anyway, it's a nice story. So, yeah, here we go. All right, this is the hangout category. And here's the B-Bar H Ranch, one of their brochures. And notice on the top, Palm Springs, California. Oh, I'm going to forget this. Okay, Palm Springs. Well, okay, why not? Because at that time, There wasn't any DHS. There was no Desert Hot Springs. It was Seven Palms Valley. There weren't any telephones. So the phone had to go to Palm Springs. There wasn't mail delivery, so the mail had to go to Palm Springs. So it made perfect sense. The B-Bar H, Palm Springs. And the next slide shows some of the celebrities who were known to be regulars at the B-Bar H guest ranch. You know, it starts out with, I'm just not doing this.
Mary Pickford.
I don't know. Oh, there we go. Well, it doesn't matter. Forget the laser light. Okay, Mary Pickford. I kind of like Monty Montana, Bing Crosby, Sal Mineo, Ronald Coleman, Phil Harris. The Marx Brothers, Tyrone Power. Oh, I used to think he was something. Warner Baxter, Janet Gaynor, Mervyn LeRoy, Joseph Selznick, Irene Dunn, Alice Faye Harris, Saul Lesser, Lionel Barrymore, Joan Crawford, Daryl Zanuck. And the next slide, there's more. Walt Disney, Wendy Berry, Eleanor Powell, Olivia de Havilland, Bob Hope, Ray Milland, Peter Lorre, Lou Ayres, Preston Foster, Joan Fontaine, Lucian Hubbard, of course, he was one of the owners, as was Charlie Bender, the end of the other column. Marlene Dietrich, Robert Taylor, Rita Hayworth, Dory Sherry, Frank Bogart from Palm Springs, John Barrett, Gary Cooper, Norma Shearer. Anyway, I mean, don't tell me there weren't any movie stars in Desert Hot Springs. The next slide shows Peter Lorre at the B-Bar H Ranch sign and gate. And I particularly like this picture because it seems as if everybody had their pictures taken at the gate, at the B-Bar H Ranch sign. And Dr. Roger, who was the little kid who lived there, spent his summers, because his grandparents owned it, and his weekends knew people like Peter Lorre. And as he said, when he was a kid, he just didn't pay any attention to them. So that was that. Now, the next picture is Peter Lorre in M. It was one of his early movies, 1931, and he played a child killer brought down by his fellow criminals. It was directed by the famous director Fritz Lang. But we often think of Peter Lorre as we see him in the next picture in Casablanca. And that was in 1942, and then a lot of people think of him also in the Maltese Falcon, 1941, and the James Bond movie, Casino Royale, in 1954. But Lorre was a regular at the B-Bar H Ranch, and everybody said he was a good and gentle horseman, contrary to his evil movie reputation. The next picture is Liz Taylor. A publicity shot from 1947, which is obviously faked, and I guess publicity shots are faked, aren't they? But this one really bothers me, and you probably can't see it from many seats, but she has a little bottle of water there on the easel, and of course it's totally white, which means she hasn't dipped a brush in it. And she has the little kids' paints, in her hand. And I don't run those down because I use those to do all of my painting, but I wouldn't for a big outdoor picture. And then I don't know if it would be all that great to stand in those flowers for that long. So anyway, it's just kind of fun. Because Liz Taylor also went to the B-Bar H Ranch. And Jim Haydett of Haydett's Hardware remembers seeing her there and being very impressed by this beautiful young lady. And then the next picture, in contrast to the first one, this is Liz Taylor in 1970 at Heathrow Airport with Richard Burton. And I don't know if you call those Heathrow Airport outfits or not, but... So let's go to the next picture. This is the B-Bar H Ranch, and I was going to point out some things in it because people have asked me, well, where is it? And is it still there? And this was the B-Bar H Ranch in 1953. And the Bubbling Wells Road would have gone right here, and 20th Street about like this. And I should have Richard Roger up here. Here was his grandparents' house. Is that right?
Yes.
And here was the big clubhouse and the pool. And then these buildings were the rock houses where guests stayed and people lived. And the main entrance with that gate and the sign would have been way up there on Bubbling Wells Road, and they would have come in about here to the ranch. So that's
DFW.
that's
there.
that's this one right here.
They cleaned up the pool lanes.
They filled in the pool, no more pool, so
Where the bodies
that's fine. No. What was that? Is that where the bodies are buried?
How do you know that, Furby?
I don't know. I think that's another book. All right, here it is in 2011. And the thing is, everything's still here. And that's what is so exciting for me. I mean, here's this main house, and here's the clubhouse and the filled-in pool. And these are the buildings where the reception and everything in the beginning, and the main entrance would have been out that way. And then these are all rock houses, which are very exciting because, you know, we're on an alluvial plain. And of course, the big rocks are going to be found on an alluvial plain. And so they were used for building, you know, many of the early houses. So 2011, it's all still there. The contemporary houses are built out around this sort of compound of the B-Bar H. So for those who've asked, where is it, and is it still here? There, you have that. And the next one. I found this and I thought it was kind of fun. There's the gate again and the sign, and it says, Ruth, hey, Mickey, I lost 2 pounds yesterday. Horse had the hiccups. Now, Coffey's Bathhouse opened in 1941, and at the time, I know this is unbelievable, there were only about 20 full-time residents in Desert Hot Springs, but 2,000 people showed up for the opening of Coffey's Bathhouse. And one of those people is in our next picture, Gene Autry. And Gene Autry didn't just show up for the opening, he was a regular at Coffey's Bathhouse. And again, I got this, the words, it was from Frank Sinatra's personal attorney before he passed away, who had experience with Gene Autry in Desert Hot Springs and going to the spas. So Gene Autry was seen around town so often that Buzz Gamble did a cartoon of Gene Autry, and he says he has Gene Autry in the spa, and so's the horse champion. And Gene Autry saying, by golly champ, the people of Desert Hot Springs have something here. Now, okay, why is Coffey Spa boarded up? Because that's what ultimately happened to it, and it was finally torn down, all of which many of us really, really regret, but we weren't here then, we had nothing to say about it. So the next slide, Al Jolson in 1927 singing Mammy, and he's here because he was also a regular at Coffey's Bathhouse. And here he is in the Jazz Singer, and while this blackface would be quite unacceptable today, it was very important for its time because it paved the way for black singers and musicians to become mainstream. And now another person who is in the hangout, help out category was Harry Bennett. How many of you know who Harry Bennett was? Great. Harry Bennett was Henry Ford's right-hand man, and what the caption says is Henry Ford and Harry Bennett in Bennett's modest but fortress-like office at the peak of Bennett's power. Now that tells you a lot right there. In the Ford Motor Company during World War II period. Well, Harry Bennett was Henry Ford's right-hand man, and he was his enforcer, and he really did ugly things. Certainly as suspected, there were actually some disappearances and murders that took place. But one of the incidents that is most remembered was called the Battle of the Overpass, and it was when some union people wanted to unionize, and on the overpass going to the Ford Company plant in Dearborn, Michigan, they were going to hand out leaflets on unionizing. Well, Harry Bennett got his goons together, and they beat up all the people who were handing out the leaflets. They beat up the photographers who were photographing it. They smashed the cameras. One cameraman was able to drop his camera off the edge of the bridge into a convertible below. And that's the only reason that the world found out about this horrible thing that took place on the overpass. I mean, they beat up the women as well as the men. I mean, it was really ugly. It is actually said, some of you may not know that Henry Ford was a Nazi sympathizer, and it is actually said that Harry Bennett's tactics were such that the Gestapo was patterned after him. Now, okay, Harry Bennett in Desert Hot Springs. When he was fired by Henry Ford's son, Harry Bennett came to Desert Hot Springs and built a winter home. And his winter home is just south of DHS, off of Dillon Road. And there actually is a road there that's named Bennett Road also. And Harry Bennett and his wife and his daughter, they were important and integral parts of the social scene in this area. He had horses, and when Palm Springs had their circus parade, the Harry Bennett horses, Bennett Ranch horses, were always in the parade. I mean, he was a respected citizen here. He also, of course, had, the black cars and the bodyguards and the shotguns and the rifles.
His house was up on a hill, really a fortress. Nobody could get to that.
Yeah, that's right. And the other thing I think is kind of fun is I've also heard that he liked to play the organ, and he would play it very loud, and this organ music would just drift out over the desert, and it was Harry Bennett up on the hill playing his organ.
There wasn't anybody around.
So anyway, celebrity, yes, I guess, but certainly an interesting person. Oh, and I also thought it was interesting that the Desert Sentinel would have articles in it that would say, like, Mr. and Mrs. Harry Bennett entertained at tea on Thursday, with so-and-so in attendance, and it was really cute. And one time they brought a raccoon home as a pet, so anyway, it was all an interesting scene. Okay, the next picture is really hard to see, and I wish I had a better picture. But I don't, and this is from the newspaper, and it's important. This is John Travolta. And John Travolta is the epitome of the hangout person, because he used to hang out in town in his jeans and T-shirt and his boots and wander around. He'd go up to Hayden's Hardware and get Jim, and they'd go over to Jim's house and they'd be shooting basketballs, on Jim Hayden's patio. They would go out in the desert and fly remote control airplanes and just, general hang out, enjoy. People knew him. John, you saw him around, right?
Came to my drugstore, my register.
There you go.
He always had just a Levi's and a T-shirt. Mm-hmm. Not dressed up as like that.
So he was a hangout person, but that wasn't all. when he got his first job, his first big break in the TV series Welcome Back, Kotter. He came back into town and he put on a show at the local grade school. He brought his Hollywood buddies in. It was a review, a stage review, and he used these students in the show as well. And he did it to make money for the school. So here was a hangout person, but he was certainly a help-out person too. And I think somebody very, very interesting. Now, I don't know how my time is going, but I'm getting towards the end.
Keep going. I don't think you're boring anyone.
The next slide, and I was going to use my little laser pointer here. This is just to kind of give you an idea of places here around Desert Hot Springs where some of these things took place. And so I'm just going to get over here in the light and do this anyway. Mission Lakes Country Club up there was because Ray Ryan originally owned that land. And of course, you know, Ray Ryan was finally blown up by the mob because he was a gambler. Horton's Market, that provided free food for Angel View. Hayden's Hardware is still there on Pearson Boulevard, and Jim Hayden still runs it. Here was John Kirby's drugstore. The Capri Restaurant was right nearby, and that's where people came for steaks. That was a big spot. Cabot's Pueblo Museum, Angel View. Okay, Three-Toed Pete's. Three-Toed Pete's is one of those mysterious places that apparently people used for trysts. And Clark Gable is one of the people who was accused of taking women there. Don't know if that's a rumor or not. Two Bunch Palms, right here. Here's the Lautner Motel, which of course has new life and is just a beautiful, beautiful place. Here's the B-Bar-H Ranch, and right nearby is the Circle B Ranch that was owned by Warner Baxter. So Warner Baxter used to go over to the B-Bar-H and they worked together. There was also another ranch, Seven Palms Ranch, and I don't know much about that, but again, I'd like to know more. And here's where Singing Tree Ranch was, off of Dillon. Harry Bennett's up here in the hills. Here's Varner, and here's where they tore down the stone building that you're all probably aware of. It was the gas station, the store, and so on. And then the Garnet Station. And that's where, literally, everybody had to come if they were coming to the desert. They'd take the train to Garnet Station. So that gives you a little bit of a, kind of an overview of the area. So now you know some of the secret history of Desert Hot Springs, but there's much, much more, and it's not ended. And stories come to light on a regular basis. And I have just a few that are kind of interesting that have been given to me since Celebrities in Hiding came out. 1955, Kim Novak spent a week vacationing at the B-Bar-H Ranch. She just finished a movie with Frank Sinatra and she came for a rest before her next filming. 1972, Robert Goulet was a special guest at the Canada Day celebration at Wardman Park. And you know, he was a singer and popular star of theater and television. He was on the Ed Sullivan Show in 1961, played Lancelot in the stage production of Camelot, maybe the movie too, not sure. In 2012, John Tesh and his wife Connie Selica served food at Food Now, and Tesh played the piano at the Senior Center. 1971, Rudolph Frimmel was installed as honorary mayor of Desert Hot Springs. Do you remember that, John?
1971.
Way too young.
Okay, who's Rudolph Frimmel? How many people know? Oh, you do know. You know.
The Met.
He was a famous composer of 36 operettas, and some of his operettas became Broadway musicals. Some starred Flo Ziegfeld, and some were even adapted for the screen. So you just forgot who he was. John Denver, while staying at Two Bunch Palms, left his laundry at the Suds You Are Duds on Palm Drive, which was owned by Betty McCready and Judy Shea, and went to visit Joshua Tree with a friend. It was just after the release of one of his CDs. And when he came back to pick up his laundry, he signed the CD and he left a $20 tip. Now, over the years, Hayden's Fisherman's Wharf of the Desert Restaurant on Pearson hosted many stars. Richard Gere, Deborah Winger, Colonel Tom Parker, Elvis Presley's personal manager, was a regular. David Nelson, Ricky Nelson's brother of the Nelsons TV show, George Hamilton, was a regular. Harvey Gross of Harvey's Lake Tahoe regularly ate there. Mel Blanc of Bugs Bunny fame. Trini Lopez, and many others. And I'm sorry, I didn't get to speak with Chuck Hayden before Celebrities in Hiding came out. So it would have many more stories from him, and hopefully I can collect those. So anyway, sequel. Okay.
Audrey, Chuck died yesterday. He had pancreatic cancer, and he did live for several months with it. He didn't suffer. He died really quickly. His wife called me today. And there'll be a memorial service at St. Elizabeth Tuesday, 11 o'clock.
Well, that just stopped me. Oh my gosh. Well, I'm very, very sorry, and I'm also sorry to say that it represents why all these stories need to be written down as well. But I certainly would not want to make the point like that. Anyway. All right. If you have a celebrity story, please contact me and let's add it to the list as part of the secret history of Desert Hot Springs. And in time, I hope that the secret history of Desert Hot Springs will become known, so it will no longer be a secret, and the stories instead will be known as the celebrity history of Desert Hot Springs. Now, if there are any questions, I'll answer them if I can, and I don't guarantee at all that I can, but I'll try. Any questions?
You can tell them about Martha Stewart having lunch at the Sidewinder and having a picture with my dog.
You know, actually, it was a really cute story, because one Sunday morning, Courtney said, John Kirby called you and he says you need to get over to the Sidewinder because Martha Stewart's there. And I thought, okay, what joke is this? But anyway, I thought, okay, I'll bite. And I went over to the Sidewinder, and sure enough, there was Martha Stewart having breakfast at the Sidewinder. And so she had asked that pretty much that they not be disturbed. And so certainly we would want to respect that. So kind of waited till she came out, and then Stephen had John Kirby's dog there and said she likes dogs, so let's see if we can take her picture with the dog. So that's what we did, and she said yes, and she held the leash of the dog, and I took the picture. And it is in Celebrities in Hiding.
She loves animals.
Yeah. And it was fun to see Martha Stewart there, because she's really she's not dressed in Martha Stewart clothes. It turns out she'd been up at Joshua Tree and I think hiking and traipsing around, and but it was kind of neat that she was there at the Sidewinder. So another one of those fun little things that you read about in other cities, but you don't read about them in Desert Hot Springs. But I'm telling you, they do occur here, and it is our secret history, which is a whole lot of fun. So any other questions or comments? All righty, there you go, that's it.
Thank you so much, Audrey. I mean,